This plenary is about communities, academic research and impact, and I want to talk a little about an innovation which has been led by the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, particularly focused on two of those, communities and academic research. And it's a programme that I'm fortunate enough to have a central role in. And it's called Connected Communities. I should really have put the new AHRC logo on there because that's actually from last year, or at least changed 10 to 11. I wonder how many people know what the AHRC themes or programmes or priority areas are. Here they are: Connected Communities, Translating Cultures, Care for the Future, Science in Culture, Digital Transformations, and the latest one is the AHRC Commons. Are they all familiar, or not at all, or slightly? Familiar, okay, well, that's good, that's reassuring. You'll notice, the key and eagle-eyed, that Connected Communities has 2 leadership fellows. That's because we're both the largest programme and probably the most complicated of all of these. And the photo there shows me and Kerry Facer, the other leadership fellow from education at the University of Bristol. Here you can find out on our tremendous and regularly updated website, connected-communities.org, all about the programme, and there are other ways of being in touch with us. One is to sign up to the JISC mail list, which is very active, and 2 is to, if you're on Twitter, is to follow us with at AHRC Connect. Connected Communities is a cross-council programme being led by the AHRC in partnership with EPSRC, ESRC, a number of research councils, and a range of other organisations to understand the changing nature of communities and their historical and cultural contexts, and the values of communities in sustaining and enhancing our future quality of life. That's what the stuff said. And in fact, that's what it said when we started this about 5 years ago, and when we signed up for it about 4 years ago. Obviously there's the text and there's the reality, and perhaps I'll get on to the reality. I'm not going to read that because it's just more text, and I've only got about 7 minutes left, and Karen's counting down. What is a community for our programme? We think our definition of community partner is deliberately, and we think really helpfully, open. We don't tell you what a community is or what a community partner might be. We leave that for you to identify for us and to identify through your collaboration. And that is the key thing about Connected Communities. It's a collaborative research programme. You won't get funding for any Connected Communities project that doesn't have at the heart of it a community partner, an external organisation. Not only will you not get funding for it, you probably won't get funding unless there's evidence in your bid that that co-design and co-production of research questions are at the heart of your process, of the process of designing your research bid. What we've been doing in Connected Communities in trying to push forward community-led research is to make that shift from KT through KE, from knowledge transfer. We academics have the knowledge. Good news, we're going to give you some. Through knowledge exchange, where there's a certain level of dialogue going on. 2, and this has become our buzzword, and it's also been there's a problem with the buzzword. It becomes just a sort of discursive device. But we're moving from knowledge transfer through knowledge exchange to co-production. We really want research questions, research projects that are made by community partners. And Rick Rylance, the previous head of the AHRC, as he said a couple of years ago in London at one of our events, in 5 to 10 years, research will be produced between organisations. A community partner could be anything from the BBC or the Royal Shakespeare Company or a major museum to a community arts organisation, a sole participatory artist or musician, someone who works on their own, to a third sectoral voluntary organisation, to a pressure group, to a campaign group, any of these kinds of things, to schools and so on. And in all these kinds of ways we've been putting academics and funding academics to work with these kinds of community partners in interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary ways. There's quite a lot of kind of push and demand that we're putting into the programme and expectation. And but we feel that it's been working. the scale of the programme to date. We've made well over 300 awards in the past 5 to 6 years, ranging from 30k to 1.5 million, with a total budget of over £40 million. And across these funded projects, academics are working with over 500 unique community partners, and a lot more relationships as well. When we started out, it was quite difficult within Research Council regulations to fund the community partners because they were non-academic. But we addressed that, and we've managed to get that changed. So now community partners are eligible for funding, for their core funding as well. And we think that's a kind of big push forward that we've made and been successful in the last few years. And you know, in that way, it seems to me, this is one thing I've learned about AHRC, working with it closely as I have been, is that the AHRC has actually been rather flexible and forward-looking institution, and ready and keen to identify issues and obstacles and find ways around them. And I think that's been great, actually. When we started out, we funded over 70 scoping studies. Seems a bit mad, 70, I don't know why we did that. But those are a key place. They're all on the AHRC website. It's a new website, therefore it's marvellous and in every way easy to access. And but you'll find them on there somewhere, and they're a great place to go for identifying where the state of the art is in the field, and how your bid or your idea, if you have one, that you're interested in collaborative research that's funded by AHRC in cross-disciplinary ways, how that might work and be framed. So we stand by this whole set of scoping studies, and there's a range of them that are up here with different titles. Yeah, we thought this was a really helpful map when we did it. We used Coggle software, right, to produce this map. It's 18 months old, so this whole section over here has got another 50 projects on it or something. And the purpose of the map today is to illustrate the scope and the complexity, I suppose, of connected communities, and the sheer range and ambition of it. And we feel it is quite an ambitious programme. And really, it's not just because there's a lot of projects. As I say, it's because the whole point of the programme and all funding in it is collaboration, is to think of new ways of making dialogue happen, is to find different research processes and new ways of doing research and new kinds of definition of what research might be. This is one little detail from it. So I put this one up because you can see, in fact, on it that down here, it's one of our first, in fact, the first large set of grants that we awarded was for a theme that we call Community Culture and the Creative Economy. And we awarded 3 large funds, large grants of 1.1, 1.2 million at the time, 3 or 4 years ago, for 3 projects there, one of which is just completed very recently, Media Community and the Creative System, led by Ian Hargreaves at Cardiff. And they had a tremendous end of project conference. And there's a book coming out in a few months' time, 2 months I think, in our book series that we have with the programme as well. And you can see some of the other media-oriented projects there too. We decided that another way of structuring the programme on our website would be to identify the kind of categories, the key areas that we work in, and this is what we came up with. And you can go onto the website, it's very kind of open and searchable. So if you click on Creative and Digital on there, you will find every project where people have identified that as, and similarly with participatory arts, and you will see that most of these are relevant to MeCCSA as a community. Well, maybe all of them are relevant to MeCCSA as a community. Another thing we've tried to do in this programme, which I think sets us apart slightly, is to create a community of scholars. And we've done this in a number of ways. One is by a real focus on our ECRs, our early career researchers. We've made special funding available for them. We've made special events specifically for them, the ones that are on the programme. And that also includes our PhD students. We've had highlight notices for collaborative doctoral awards and for research networks. It's another way of making communities happen. Each year on Connected Communities, we bring together in a gathering across the whole programme a set of activities for award holders, and this might be a showcase, a residential summit, Last year it was a festival, this year it's a festival about utopian community. And we've got a number of follow-on funding mechanisms. And on my last slide, some recent current funding calls and activities. And I'll just draw your attention to about 3 of them. One is what I just mentioned, the Communities in Utopia. It's part of the Utopia 500 events, 500th anniversary of the publication of Thomas More's Utopia in 1516. Reggae is Transatlantic Musical Community Research Network. Anyone interested in that? I put the word reggae into the HRC search on the website, and it came up with nil return, right? So I thought, right, we've got to do something on reggae. And so now we're doing something on reggae. And we also have, as leadership fellows, we have small funds available that people can apply for, very small grants. And so these are some of the things that are coming up this year and so on across connected communities. Thank you.
Everybody wants to have impact for their research. I mean, who doesn't want to have impact? You sweat away writing journal articles, which you have to do, and then 1.5 million people read them. So that's quite a good impact factor. So having impact goes beyond that, basically. So I think what we all want to do is have impact in a broader community sense, impact on communities, on policies, preferably doing the sort of things that we want to do with communities. So one way to do that, and one way we've been encouraged to do that, is to work with community partners. This is actually what you were just talking about a minute ago. And I've learnt that through doing EPSRC projects, because the EPSRC, oddly enough, are very keen, well, perhaps not oddly enough, they're very keen on getting people to work with community partners right from the start. So we had this experience that we have to find the community partners before we start the project. And then that's always a problem, because we maybe don't start the project and the community partner feels let down. So there's a problem there right at the beginning, basically, with working with community partners. But there's also various problems as you go through. That's not to say it's not rewarding. It is rewarding. It is important. And I think having that, what you just call this knowledge exchange process, is all about not just doing the project and then presenting at the end. There you are, folks. Make something of that. It's about really working with people as you go through and then developing research ideas in conjunction with the community partners. But as I say, it sounds great. It is great, and it's something we all want to do, but it's something that's actually quite problematic. And I'm going to talk about one particular project we're doing at the moment. I could have talked about any number of projects, as they're all quite problematic, but this one we're doing at the moment with the City of Aberdeen. And they asked us, because I was giving these various public engagement talks about rural communities that I talked about this morning, I was asked by the City of Aberdeen to help with their regeneration project, and they're trying to regenerate. And I was quite surprised, actually, because Aberdeen is one of the wealthiest cities in the UK, but large parts of it are regeneration areas, and they go right through the middle of the city. And I'd never known about these areas. I just drove past them in my car. So it's been an education for me as much as anything else to get to know these regeneration areas and to get to know some of the key participants in them. And our partner is partly the City Council, but also the local radio station. I think we had a talk yesterday in the plenary about the community radio initiative, and this is our partner is called Station House Media Unit, and they're a community radio who also do various other things. So they have newsletters for the different communities. They've got various projects, or the sort of multimedia type projects which they do. I can't even remember what they all are, but anyway, there's lots of projects that they do with these different regeneration communities, and they're based in the regeneration communities. They're aiming to help with stimulating various activities and providing a communication source in the community. Now, what their idea was, and what we've been working on them with, is to set up a community portal. So I talked this morning about how community websites were important for developing communities, or developing a sense of community. Well, this was the idea, was to apply it to an urban area, but it turns out to be a lot more difficult to apply it to an urban area than to a rural area, because a village is a kind of confined place, so everybody has to go to the post office, they all more or less know each other. A regeneration area of a city is just an area, it's a huge area, which is a residential area. And another difference is that a lot of people who live in that residential area don't want to live in the residential area, they'd rather live somewhere else. So it's a kind of almost like they don't have a kind of identification with the community in the way that the people in the villages did. People who live in villages, generally speaking, want to live in villages, but people who live in regeneration areas quite often don't. So there's been various ways of problems about how we define community in that context, because the community actually is defined by the city council, because it's defined as the area in which we should get involved. But the people in the community don't think of it as a community, or not many of them do anyway. So in fact, I think only the people involved in the regeneration project think of it as a community. For everybody else, it's either not, it's just a place where they live, or they're involved in other kinds of communities in the city. So the young people, for example, go downtown. They don't go to the local pubs in the regeneration area, which are full of old men. So they don't really identify with that very much. They don't necessarily go to the community centres because they're, again, identified with other kind of population groups. So for the young people, the community isn't the regeneration area. It's the city, you know, and the city downtown, and that's where the discotheques and things are. So so for young people, the community means something else. For migrant groups, it means something else again. So for migrant groups, there's quite a lot of migrant groups there, mainly because it tends to be the housing which they get shoved into. And there's a very strong Polish migrant community, for example, that acts as a migrant community for Polish people across the city. But they don't get involved in regeneration projects at all, because they don't identify with that community. They think it's a rather rough place, but they don't really want to associate themselves with it. So again, the community for the Polish migrants isn't this regeneration area either. For older people, the community is usually a sub-area of the regeneration area, because for older people, they can get to the local shop or they can get to the local community centre. So for them, it's a much more restricted place, and also quite often, the older people have lived there for much longer. So they've got a different idea about what it is, because they can remember it when going back, and they've got roots in the community and they know people and so on. So for them, it's a kind of another community. So looking at these regeneration areas, which has more than 10,000 people, what you've got is a different concept of community from all these different groups. So the young people, the parents with children, again we tried to identify those groups. The parents with children would see it differently, because they see the play parks and so on. So they've got another sense of what the community is, and there's certain play parks where they just wouldn't go because they think they're dangerous or they're full of old needles and things. So there's problematic anyway to define this as a community if we're thinking about it in terms of regeneration. So how on earth do you get people to participate in something that they don't really think as being a community at all? It's just something that the council has designated as an area. So another problem that we have is that although we're working with the City Council, we mustn't say that we're working with the City Council, because people don't like the City Council, because what you do is you stimulate lots of complaints about the City Council, which we can't do anything about that, because we're researchers. So it's very important that we're identified as working with the Station House Media Unit, because the Station House Media Unit, which is this community radio, have lots of different contacts in different community groups. So they know people amongst the young people. They know, they've got volunteers that work on different projects with them. They've got familiar faces in these communities, and they're using it. Actually, they have a lot of student volunteers as well working with them, and they're a kind of trusted organisation. So it's very important that we're seen as working with them, not with the City Council, even though actually we are working with the City Council. But so we have to play that quite carefully, in terms of who we're seen as identified with. And I was quite pleased to work with the City Council in a way, because there you could have some impact on their future plans and how they're going to regenerate the area. So for us, it's important to be part of have some relationship with the City Council, but in terms of our interface with the community, it probably isn't such a good idea. So there's various ways in which these kind of relationships, these kind of community relationships, are quite problematical. And I think another problem which we've run across in this project, and in fact with all the projects we've worked in when we've worked with community partners, is they never stick to the right timescale, because the community partners are dependent on funding. So sometimes they get some funding, then they don't get some funding, then the funding runs out, or something happens, they're not able to spend it. So in fact, the university, as part of the Rural project I was working on, were co-funding this community portal, which we were going to do for the regeneration areas. But what happened was that there was some problem with the council tendering process. Our project was only 6 months, and it looks like by the end of the project, the community portal won't be there. So what we're doing is going around talking to different community elements about what they want from this portal, and we were supposed to be then evaluating how they use the portal. It looks like that might not happen. So we have to sort of think of some plan B, basically, about how to tidy up this project and how we could revisit it perhaps in the future. And that's another issue about, how long should you give something to embed? So should we say that, okay, we revisit it in 3 months, or we revisit it in 6 months, or in 1 year? How long does it take for people to get used to some sort of digital application, and whether they use it or not? I mean, they may not use it at all, but if they're going to use it, we want to see how it might embed itself. But I think it would probably take longer than 3 months, which is all we've got, assuming they get the digital portal up and running immediately. So anyway, so there's various problems. So actually, at Station House Media Unit, they haven't even used the money that we provided from the university because they didn't get the portal up in time. And meanwhile, our grant ran out, which was supposed to be co-funding them. So I think that whilst we all want to have impact, and I think it's important to have impact, and it's fun to do these kind of projects, I think I just want to raise the issue that there's all sorts of problems with how you work with community partners, and it's much more problematic than just doing a research project in the old-fashioned sense, where you went out, got the data, did your Gantt chart, and then you finished. Because these projects are kind of ongoing, they're very long, they're very complicated, and you find all sorts of problems when you start to do them. But that's not to put you off doing them. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Destination Local is a programme of work that NESTA has been supporting for almost 4 years now, so it comes to a close in March, and it is part of our wider remit, which supports digital arts and media. And Destination Local is particularly supporting hyperlocal media, so that obviously means different things to different people. Some people might know it more as community journalism, and I know lots of other presentations over the course of the last couple of days. There's also surface stuff around hyperlocal media as well. So the purpose of the programme is to understand the potential for and stimulate a diverse and sustainable base of UK hyperlocal services that create public value, and also as part of that to try and stimulate sort of additional investment into the sector, as much as what NESTA has been contributing. And our definition is in Wikipedia, but I think even from when we first started off, it's evolved, and I think a lot of people are dropping the term hyperlocal because when we're talking about communities, what do we mean by community? Originally it was sort of around this notion of a geographic community, but I think even as Claire raised, and through some of the work that we're doing with other project partners, community means different things to different people, and is it a community of practice, is it a community of interest, and even in a geographical sense, there's obviously not sort of like walls around local villages or towns or what have you. So we have done a mix of research, grant funding, and sort of policy provocation over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. And I guess in terms of NESTA's wider work as well, so we have different elements within NESTA. So we have a policy and research team, we have sort of innovation programs, and then also challenge prize element as well. And within the innovation programs, most of the time there's an element of research and development, and also sort of through traditional grant funding. So in phase 1 of our program, which lasted for a year from sort of March 2012, we did a lot of primary research. So no research had ever been done within hyperlocal media much before the likes of NESTA and a few other organisations in the UK were rolling it out. And that was to really get a sense of understanding the landscape, so understanding the supply and demand within local communities. So there was lots of sort of omnibus surveys with local businesses and local residents to understand how they find local media and how they interact with local content as well. Also looking at local advertising markets, so again that was specifically to do with businesses within local communities. And as part of the phase 1 area of work, we also grant funded 10 projects to understand the sort of different propositions for business and service models and the challenges and opportunities that came out of those. So within all of that research that we did, we were going into phase 2 of the project, which was then looking at 4 key priority areas, and that was to continue our work with Innovate UK, which was then of course called the Technology Strategy Board, which we'd worked alongside in a sort of an indirect way within phase 1, to look at further sort of policy provocation, to try and encourage industry-led research, so not just coming from sort of, I guess, NESTA or academic institutes, but looking at other media organisations and how they could contribute to sort of the research agenda. And then also trying to get more collaboration going between local emerging sort of community journalism sites, as much with then traditional media partners as well. So in terms of the sort of just the current things that we're working on at the moment, so in September, and some people I know in the room were at our event in Cardiff, where we partnered with Cardiff University to try and pull together all of the research that's been done across sort of the community journalism landscape, and we held an event and also brought a report together. And then 2 other research projects that I'm delivering at the moment is looking at hyperlocal revenue streams, because it was sort of a gap that we know that lots of different people within communities are relying on things like local advertising to prop up their hyperlocal service, but a lot of people don't really know what else is out there for them, and so that's a UK-wide and European-wide study, including 35 case studies. So again, trying to get the learning from people working within local communities from Europe to then share that with the UK and vice versa. And then action research and audience analytics project, which I'll talk about a little bit more as well, and that's sort of that's all coming to a conclusion in March. So in terms of a wider perspective of NESTA, and not just related to my program, so sort of the current trends, and I guess that have been coming up in the last sort of few years, and that they're continuing to focus on as an organisation. So we have a challenge prizes team, and that's obviously sort of more process driven rather than looking at sort of end impact, because obviously funding is distributed differently. Traditional grant funding and innovation programs, and there's more of a focus now, because I think as an organisation we haven't been very good at articulating impact, so whether it's around defining what type of impact we're trying to achieve, but then also knowing what success looks like. And I'm not sure if that's a legacy from when we were part of government up until 2012, but I think it's something that we're really trying to work on as an organisation, because we're trying to, I guess, if we're trying to say to the projects that we fund, you need to be showing impact or you need to be showing progress, but if we're not doing it as an organisation ourselves, then it doesn't seem like it's the most effective way of doing things. So there's lots of talk at the moment about theory of change, which I didn't put in place into my program because the program had started before I actually started at NESTA, and then there's the innovation spiral as well, which I'll show you an example of, but it's kind of, they're trying to look at different ways of how we map and sort of articulate the progress that we're making as an organisation, as wider programs, and also sort of within the individual projects that we support. And we also have the Impact Investments Fund, which they do things differently again. They sort of have this standards of evidence, which I personally think we should probably use a little bit more across the wider range of programs that we deliver at NESTA, because it's part of the Alliance for Useful Evidence, and there's sort of different stages where they're working with projects in order to get projects to show evidence and sort of evidence their progress along the way. But I won't talk too much about that today because it's sort of a completely separate bit of work and a separate team as well. Policy and research team at the moment are quite interested in exploring new research methods as well, and sort of like cross-research methods in sort of certain programs that they're dealing with. There's a lot more emphasis on us as well in terms of partnerships with other institutes, whether it's academics or funding bodies or government, and a mix of sort of both private and public organisations. And that's just a general shift that NESTA is going through in terms of whether it's more effective working where we think that could be had by partnering with other organisations, but also looking at how we spend our resources basically, and that it's more effective to be financing programs of work with other organisations. Big focus as well also on sharing evidence through the journey of the projects that we fund. So it's not just about looking at an end result, getting a research report out and saying, oh, here are the findings, because obviously practitioners are not learning at all through that sort of method. And we don't think it's a very effective way of doing things. So there's more and more focus on trying to share evidence. So whether it's formal evidence or informal, so whether it's even through blogs, little snippets of information or sort of like data sets sort of along the way. And then this sort of portfolio approach to outputs as well. So it's not just about, again, sort of this paper copy of an academic style report. Lots of outputs and dissemination activities, so including practice guides, events, roundtables. My project at the moment, my action research project, we're delivering online video tutorials. So lots of really practical stuff that people working within local communities can also utilise, as much as then trying to steer recommendations towards policymakers and also wider industry. I'm going to jump through because I didn't realise how much I was talking. Let me go through. So example of theory of change. It's probably not going to mean much to many people in terms of the content that's in this, but it's sort of, I think it's one of those processes that is very chunky to begin with, but it's supposed to make everything make more sense as you're going through a project. Here's our, not all of the information has come up on this innovation spiral, but this is the kind of thing that we're constantly seeing sort of at NESTA in terms of a starting point and knowing, sort of mapping along the way the different places that we think our programs are supposed to be entering and finishing, I guess, in a way. And I can share these slides also with people afterwards. So thanks.
Thank you very much, and that's been a series of really interesting presentations, so I will try to be brief and just share with you some of my experiences with impact and the impact of research on communities. And what I really want to share with you is feeling, yes, of opportunity that all the other speakers have recognized, but also malaise, of a feeling of being reinvented, though not under self-selected circumstances, where there are things that I was doing anyway and would have continued to do that have been reinvented and relabeled through this lens of impact. And I'm sure that's something others can relate with. And this has been particularly uncomfortable for me when I felt squeezed into a kind of linear trajectory of problem solving, where my research will generate this better understanding, then this better understanding can go out and solve the problem, quote unquote, if only I can disseminate it properly and then measure it. And this is a challenge. And in the interest of full disclosure, I did co-author an impact case study with a colleague in my department. So this comes very much from the heart of experiencing these institutional processes. And I think the main challenge, as I see it, in terms of impact, and it's something I spoke a little bit about this morning, is a democratic challenge. It's this question of who is defining the problem, and in the process, who's speaking and who's listening. there's a real danger that however attentively we might listen and work with communities during the research process, when we push toward impact after the fact, these processes can become quickly very undemocratic, where they authorize people, ourselves, academics, myself, an academic, to speak often in the place of people rather than with them. And this is something I've been thinking a lot in terms of my own research. I'm doing some work right now on listening as a political process, and I'll let you in on a big secret about one of the main findings of this work, which is that in order to listen properly, it's very important to stop talking. And I think this is a problem we need to take very seriously as academics whose business it is to talk and talk and talk, and to invest listening with politics and with principles, however contested they may be. And in terms of my own experience with different research projects, the one I wanted to share with you, which is relevant to this conference, is work with young people and riot-affected communities following the 2011 riots, where I did some work exploring with young people and residents of riot-affected areas how they experienced mainstream media coverage. And in the context, especially in the immediate aftermath of the riots, September, October, November, I was once again struck by a kind of a land grab mentality among myself and other academic colleagues, where it seemed we were all sort of scrambling to appropriate the events, to take them under our institutional umbrella, to turn them into our own projects, to make them into our case studies. And this is really a kind of impulse I think we need to guard very much against. I would suggest there's a similar concern raised with the current refugee crisis, where now more than ever we need to be cooperating and collaborating and sharing our information and our ideas and our research strategies rather than sitting on them in our corners. So the message here really is about process as much as substance of engagement, about the how as much as the what. And in my own case, I'm not trying to be prescriptive, I just want to share my experience with you. This has been very much the fruit of my experiences both within and outside of academia. I had the opportunity to work for several years in series of emergency outreach organizations in France, where I worked with asylum seekers, where I worked with homeless people. And there I was really struck by a disconnect between academic agendas and realities on the ground, where I had been this student of political theory who learned about marginalization and inclusion and exclusion, which didn't map onto what I was confronting as a third sector worker. And this came to a head for me one day when I came across a colleague who was a legal advisor in an organization I was working with, who was musing on the question of refugee women. Should we speak of persecution or should we speak of persecutions? In the singular or in the plural? And while she pondered this question, families waited in the hallway for her to sign a bit of paper so they would have something to eat that night. And that disconnect has informed very much the substance of my research in thinking through, for instance, issues around whether multiculturalism is bad for women because it may authorize men within communities to impose what they call culture or religion on women within communities, to instead consider specific experiences and consider different alternative definitions of problems on the part of groups of, for instance, Muslim refugee women, who yes, experience these forms of oppression within communities, but are also at the intersection of hierarchies of race, class, and legal status. So instead of asking whether multiculturalism is bad for women, we might ask instead, well, who decides what's bad for women? And drawing on that substance of research, we can feed into also process in terms of thinking of engagement, and that's something I've very much tried to do in thinking through some of the problems, and Claire, you were speaking about this as well, and you spoke about this in the context of AHRC, of how we work with and not speak for the groups whose lives we enter in the process of our research. Certainly not to enlighten them about their own circumstances from the lofty heights of the ivory tower. This can mean partnerships. This can mean creating resources for meaningful opportunities where groups can enter into debates, not just to follow the terms already set, but to challenge the terms of debate. I mean, I don't need to tell media scholars about reframing debates, but this is the opportunity I think I've certainly been very keen on trying to promote and try to open those parameters of debate, to change the terms, not myself, to provide leverage through my own forms of capital for other groups to be able to do this in ways they might not have been able to. The million-dollar question, of course, is how. These institutional frameworks are affecting all of us. I know myself, I'm internalizing them wittingly and unwittingly. that even sets the terms of engagement, what we even decide are the horizons of what's possible and desirable as impact activity. I look at many of the leading scholars in my field of migration studies. Well, they did crazy things like write pamphlets and book chapters and would not have been referable in their lifetimes, nor would they have had any desire to demonstrate impact in the terms that we're using. But they fundamentally shape the way we understand human mobility. So I guess the call then for myself is about the kind of creativity and innovation to the extent possible within the frameworks that we have to operate. And we've visited in some of the other presentations these questions of the how in terms of time. Is it a research first, impact later? Is it co-production? Are there ways in which we can blend these models? I've certainly tried to experiment with all of these approaches. I would suggest we shouldn't abandon the idea of research first and impact after, because there are some very interesting ways we can do this. I know in my case, I had the opportunity to arrange an ESRC Festival of Social Science event where I worked with young people through the university's widening participation network, where we invited young people from multicultural Leicester, a minority-majority city, to come to the university to participate in university-led workshops and then to develop their own manifesto for a successful multicultural Leicester. They then presented this to the deputy mayor. Many of these young people were not from backgrounds where they would normally have been meeting the deputy mayor. Co-construction, certainly, and I would agree very much with what Claire was saying. This is fraught and challenging. In the media and the riots work that I did, I wrote a report with the Citizen Journalism website and a Citizen Journalism charity, and this process was in and of itself quite fraught, because I was very concerned as an academic with placing in the literature, with method, with how representative the population at events we observed was in terms of informing the research. They were very concerned with me actually finishing the thing in his lifetime and writing in English, so someone else could read it who was not an academic and understand the final report. It was also very interesting to get feedback during that process of writing the report from Tottenham-based communities, particularly from Black activists, who were very concerned that Mark Duggan's death not get lost in the analysis over different forms of media representation of young people more generally. There was a modest attempt there at policy contribution. The report was included as a submission to the Leveson inquiry. But more importantly, this idea of opening up spaces for young people, different types of spaces, whether that was in the form of how they were represented within the media or in the form of improving diversity within the profession. You're all much more knowledgeable about that than I am. What my interest there, my axe to grind really was around voice and participation, and also outing forms of white privilege. Finally, we can think about blended approaches where there are moments of research and moments of knowledge exchange. You distinguished earlier between knowledge transfer and knowledge exchange. In the project I spoke about earlier today with Akugo Emejulu, we had that opportunity to have phases of data collection and knowledge exchange events with different minority women activists and relevant organizations that could then feed into the research process throughout. I'm not suggesting these issues are unique to my own project. I think we're all confronting these questions, especially this question of time and how. I'd really just like to stress that in my own experience, none of these different experiments and different forays allowed me to fit neatly into that linear trajectory of problem solving. It involved instead opening up spaces and creating these kinds of ruptures, in sequence of ruptures. And it was really very much about opening new spaces for participation in public debate, leveraging forms of my capital so other groups and other actors could challenge the debate and set them on their own terms. Thank you.
From Goldsmiths. I was really struck, Leah, by your comment on disruption, because I think often some of the best impact that we can bring is disrupting norms and kind of getting people to think in different ways about different things, or working with people and ourselves thinking, changing our views. And one of the real problems with that is that it is immeasurable. Or it doesn't fit neatly into a kind of narrative. I don't even know sometimes how to explain that, how to give it a narrative structure even. How do you talk about, how do you even calculate or assess that? It's a kind of, because it's all it's such a moving process and an organic process that you're working with, in that, I think the stuff that I now term action research that I've been involved with, that becomes really very difficult. So and my anxiety with the impact, I have a love-hate thing with the whole impact agenda, is that we are squeezed ever more into those ways of explaining ourselves, that I even feel it now. I feel that when I start writing the grant application, I start to talk that language and start to use that discourse in a way that then makes me perform my research in a particular way. And so it's a comment rather than a question. I just don't know how there must be ways of resisting that whilst still being funded.
Anyone want to kind of contribute to in terms of that?
Well, I mean, I sit on quite a lot of panels at the Research Council, and I read a lot of applications that come in, and there is often a feeling around a panel of a sinking heart or a deep sigh at the discourse, the way that the language is presented, you know. So, so grant applicants themselves don't like writing in that way, and then the award panel doesn't like to read in that way, and yet we're all kind of doing it still, you know.
Yeah.
And even in that short, small block where you're supposed to put down the public-facing description of what your research proposal is, you know, they say they want 500 words, they can put it on the AHRC website or something, that everyone will be able to understand, okay? Often, we can't even understand what the 500 words are, and we're specialists. So we do get caught up in a kind of an excessive discourse, perhaps. And, well, yeah, that's my observation.
How do we break that then, though, George? I mean, that's the issue, is if you hate it, we hate it, yet we're all doing it. Why?
Because presumably we're not independent, are we? I mean, that part of the problem is, you know, that we're serving people, I would say masters, out with our preferences. But, I mean, clearly people play the game.
Yeah. But it becomes a nonsense when we're all playing the game with each other, and the game, and then reproducing that to a certain level, when actually it becomes, you know, it reinforces things which then limit the work we do, which is not its intention.
I feel a research project coming on.
Could I ask George, I mean, what would happen if you were to get a research application which suggested disrupting these kind of relationships? I don't know, just kind of getting people to criticise the Aberdeen Council or something?
From an AHRC's perspective, you know, our rhetoric is always, in our programme anyway, in Connected Communities, is about innovation, edginess, change, shift, social justice, and sometimes disruption. You know, that's our rhetoric. Okay, so we try and encourage applications like that and activities that are like that, and also we work. Right, you know, everyone here today, I thought it was great when everyone was talking because we're all very polite. And then, but at a Connected Communities event, it would have been some of the things that were being said this afternoon. There would have been quite a lot of heckling and stuff. You know, it's a different sort of group of people, which includes some academics, but you have to speak a different language when you're speaking with people who are not academics, who you want to work with, and who've expressed an enthusiasm to work with you because they've turned up, you know. Okay, nowadays they're getting paid to turn up, and that's, you know, which is great, marvellous. So that's part of the thing I think with our programme. Yeah.
But maybe then you're throwing down a gauntlet to us, because if you're saying actually we want, you know, the AHRC, maybe not the ESRC so much, but if the AHRC wants to see those kinds of more disruptive, radical research proposals, then it's down to us to make them.
It's not just that though, it's, you know, if you're on a panel, there's another group of people involved, so there's the applicants, there's the panel, and then there are the peer reviewers in the middle, right? Well, the peer reviewers, probably there are quite a number of peer reviewers in this room. If the peer reviewers have said that an application is flawed, fundamentally poor, or awkward, or difficult, or, you know, could be a bit problematic, this one in some way, and then given it a low grading, it's very, very difficult for the panel to not take those on board. So it's not just these two groups of people, it's, you know, us as panel reviewers. If you get something as peer reviewers, if you get then applications to you as peer reviewers, which you think are really marvellous and disruptive and innovative and so on, right? Give them top grades, you know, and then, you know, give them top grades and then write strong statements of support for
And it
them.
has to be top grades, right? Not nothing below top grades.
So I would say that, and maybe in these ways, you know, we can start to change things further within the context of the Research Council. So.
I've got two questions, Renata and then
Well,
Agnes.
it's more of my experience really rather than
Do you want to
the
say who
question,
you
but
are?
I'm Renata Chera from Sheffield Hallam. It is my experience that when I put in a grant application, that goes for national councils as well as European funding, the reviews, the peer reviews, and they are very contradictory. So you would get 3 views, one positive, one semi-positive, and one negative, and you don't get the money. So how does that make sense? I mean, I don't know, does anybody share the same experience? I mean, how does that happen? It doesn't make sense. Never mind the immeasurable and the. So what are we doing as peer reviewers, and why are we receiving this kind of contradictory feedback?
God, I never thought I'd be at a MECCSA conference, right? Sitting at the front, defending the Research Council. It's not what I got into academia to do. And then, anyway.
It's not a question to you, I mean, it's just the experience of...
It's an observation,
Yes, okay.
but I think that many of us kind of
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's, you know, it's reviews of journal articles, it's book proposals and so on, isn't it? You know, but this is the best thing ever written in the field. And it says here, reviewer 1, reviewer 2 says this is appalling and then unpublishable.
was over thus.
Well, I think that just says a lot about, and it brings me to what Leah said, the contradictions, of how, how researchers and academics works at the interface with society and social problems, and this is, maybe it is as it should be that, the real work is done outside universities now, and it's not inside here. But that's, okay.
Yeah, I've got a question for Kathryn actually. Obviously you're on the other side of the fence. In your experience, when is academic research the most impactful, so to speak?
Within my particular program, I would say when we are working with the people at grassroots to get them to define what impact they're trying to make within their own communities and for their own service or own project, instead of being prescriptive. And I think it was sort of on one of my later slides in terms of the opportunities of the way that we work, but also the challenges in terms of, I think especially, say, with hyperlocal media, when we first started supporting this sector, it was so nascent. We had no knowledge about it whatsoever in the UK before NESTA and a few other organisations started. So we couldn't even say ourselves what expectations we had of the projects that we were working with, or what impact we thought that we should get them to have at the end of 6 months or a year or something. And I think then the action research and audience analytics project that I'm rolling out at the moment, so I'm supporting 10 services with grant funding, but then also non-financial support, so lots of resources that are coming out of it. And even from the application process, so I think we got about 32 applications. It was very much, what do you want to achieve? Why do you think being part of this process will help you achieve that? And then consistently asking those questions again throughout, so they report to us on a monthly basis in terms of progress, but it's all about progress that they're working towards to the impact that they want. So it's not NESTA saying, well, this is what we expect of you in a year's time, because it's so different for every local service or local community. And I think it's not, we wouldn't be the right ones to say what they should be achieving by, whether it's a timeline or sort of with a certain amount of money. And I think that's probably in my program, that's the best way that I've seen the work happening at the moment, sort of, and not being not spoon feeding them either with help, you know, getting them to think for themselves as well.
I'm a PhD researcher right now, and so this whole impact thing is still relatively new to me. But one of the things that I'm most apprehensive about is trying to get a job afterwards, and I'm apprehensive about it because of an experience of a friend of mine who is in a recent position, who's just gone into getting a job himself, and he was after finishing his PhD, he was in a very, very precarious job situation for quite a while until he got a big bit of funding from the AHRC, at which point his institution gave him a contract. So it strikes me as, unless I'm capable of fitting whatever kind of research project I want to be doing afterwards into the language of these funding streams and whatnot, not only am I not going to get funding, I'm not going to get a job. And I think that's a really serious issue that might need to be addressed. I don't know.
Well, okay, I don't know really. I mean, it could be that another friend or someone else's friend who just got a job did it on the back of having a book contract or something like that. You know, that's kind of so there might be 20 people going for interview out of 50 applicants or something, and 35 have got PhDs. 4 of them have got book contracts. 1 of them's got a grant and a book contract. Well, they're going to look at that person at the top of the pile. You know, they're going to definitely interview them, and they may be their strongest candidate. Doesn't mean they'll get it, but that might be part of it. So yes, there is pressure. You know, you've got to write your PhD, and then you've got to think about the value added after the PhD that will get you the job. The PhD is the sort of the starting point to get you onto that next. It's going to be a dreadful ladder metaphor that's going to confuse now. And so I'm not sure. I mean, we were in a ECR's panel just before this, talking about some of these issues actually, and it could be that a grant sets you apart. You know, it could be that it's, you know, you've got a journal accepted in theory, an article accepted in theory, culture and society, or, you know, something like that. It could be any number of extra things which are in themselves pretty difficult to do.
Do you find that it's moving more towards the ability to obtain funding over any other kind of, whether it's publications or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure really. You need to ask. I don't know if I do feel that. I mean, I'll give a very specific response from Connected Communities, which is that we have had special funding ring-fenced for early career researchers. Okay, so we've done that. We've brought a group of 60 or 70 of them together and then said we're going to fund 30 projects out of this, or 15 projects to up to 100k each, and then so talk with each other, come up with some ideas, and then go away, work them up, and then we'll see what comes from it. And we've done that specifically for our ECRs because the research councils recognise that, you know, they fund each year, the AHRC funds maybe 600 or 700 PhD studentships. Okay, well, each year there's a big number of students that are graduating with AHRC funding with a doctorate who are not getting a post. So AHRC is concerned with ECRs, career development and trajectory. And one of the ways they're trying to address that is to put in place postdoc opportunities, ECR funding and things like that, you know. So there's a bit of science behind it, a bit of method behind it.
Thank you.
But also you're suggesting there's quite a lot of luck with these things in terms of what people are looking for at any one day.
Yeah, but that's for you know, people that are chairs of interview panels as well to kind of to comment on, and that is the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just really sorry, Mike Wilson, Loughborough University. Speaking as someone who's sat on a number of interview panels, selection panels, I don't think there's any doubt that the environment at the moment is a very competitive one. And when we have new lectureship posts, the quality of the field is astonishing, certainly compared to when I was in that position. I wouldn't have a hope in hell's chance of getting onto the shortlist. I read, certainly from where I was when I got my first post, it's extremely competitive. You're now talking about receiving applications, maybe 70 applications for one post, of which 50 or 60 of those are people with PhDs. Many of them have very impressive publication records. The Connected Communities programme notwithstanding, very few early career researchers looking for their first post will have funding of their own. It's unusual, and the Connected Communities programme, and George knows that I'm associated with that in a number of ways, I think is incredibly innovative in the way that it's identified funding and ring-fence funding for early career researchers. So where you're faced with a load of applications where an early career researcher does have funding of their own, it's unusual, and as George says, that is going to leap out on onto the page, and amongst a sea of applications is more than likely going to get someone on the shortlist. It doesn't guarantee the job at all, but it does make a difference. But it's rare, so I wouldn't be anxious that you wouldn't get a job if you haven't got funding, because not many people do. But if you do have funding, then it's inevitably going to help.
Okay, cheers.
Yeah, I've sat on lots of selection panels as well, and then just to reiterate that I think that having high quality publications is the most important thing, because a lot of people have PhDs, but having publications does make a difference, because that makes that makes you more employable. But having grants is very unusual at an early career researcher stage. But it is important if you want promotion beyond that. Then it's essential. So then you've got to play the game at some point.
Oh yeah.
Just to say, I don't want to dismiss these concerns about precarity in our sector, and I'm very, very sympathetic, of course, having remembered entering the whole process of entering myself. But I wonder if we might also return to the concerns around engaging with other communities outside of our own. And I'd invite also your reflections on the different visions we put forward. I mean, certainly I'd be very interested, following on from what you said in response to my intervention, about whether we should be aiming at a kind of politics of rupture, whether we are willing to engage in meaningful political forms of listening and actually step aside at points in impact processes, to what extent this works within institutional frameworks. I mean, I'm speaking about my own concerns here, but really be very interested to hear from you.
First, can you just say two questions? Yeah, you first.
University of Liverpool, Institute of Cultural Capital. I think part of the debate we're having here is about the stupidity of the concept of impact. And I'm somebody who spends an awful lot of time worrying about impact, because it's a model we've borrowed from engineering that doesn't even exist in the engineering domain anymore. I mean, if you look at the work of some of the major IT companies, they don't have the researchers here producing widget 13, which goes to whatever and is sold by. That's a model from 1900. They are, was the word agile and so on. And we borrowed this model, and it formed that little model of, intellectual endeavour here and output down this end that has some impact, is what we frame the whole discourse around. And to be honest, social science has never been like that. There has been social science that is in its ivory tower, and there's been social science that's been on the ground with communities and doing good or bad things and having good or bad impact. I think we need to be able to start talking back to government and back to research councils about the fact that there are different models of the process of the relationship between academia and people who are not academics, and different types of impact. And people like the HRC are far further down that debate road than other people seem to be. The ref maybe, and I think that's part of the problem, is stepping back and saying, where have we got this silly idea from that's a linear direction from one thing to the other? And the truth is, good research never survives first contact with the real world. The question changes, the whatever you do. And if you start from the premise that the question's a collaborative product, it's very likely to change as the collaboration moves on. And being able to articulate that clearly in an application is for us to do. When you've got your pathways to impact statement, you don't have to say it will go from knowledge here to whatever there. It can go from community here to community there, and somewhere in the middle as an academic does something. It's us to tell that story. I think we just need to persuade some others that there are other models. And that's, I think we are doing, but I think that's not as challenging, but I don't think it's as stark as some people were presenting. I think we need to keep remaking that point.
Sarah Motley, Sussex University. I actually just wanted to echo and pick up on what you were saying, Leah, because I found your presentation very engaging. And I think that I find it really interesting that our first response is to talk about university infrastructures and processes rather than actually to address the points that you were making. So I think maybe that's the answer, is to stop thinking about the implications for us in the processes of our research and start thinking about the implications for the communities we're researching. Because one of the big points that came across to me was the danger of appropriating particular communities to generate things like impact or to secure funding. And I've experienced that myself along with Helen with trying to work with military veteran communities who feel oversaturated by academics who are trying to secure them to take part in research projects because of policy implications or because they're much like the riot communities. So maybe it's just to return to those questions about implications for them rather than for us.
So I think on that very helpful note, Sarah, I think that we'll call this to a close. I think what we've had for the last kind of hour and a half is some really kind of thoughtful reflections on these notions, these contested notions in some ways of notions of community and impact, and maybe to think about some of that discussion, but particularly this idea of the disconnect between community and academy that often exists. So just lastly to kind of thank our panelists again. Thank you.
We wrote a letter that was published in the Independent newspaper, addressed primarily for the attention of John Whittingdale, which was objecting to the terms of reference of the white paper, largely along the lines of that this is too economistic, it's driven purely by the value of the BBC being measured through its kind of economic, from an economic perspective rather than social and political value that the BBC in all of its many different forms brings to bear on the UK.